Okay, so, uh, this whole thing with House Speaker Mike Johnson saying, we do have the authority over the federal courts as, we can eliminate an entire district court, really got me thinking,
Yeah.
especially with all of Trump's legal battles going on right now.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that statement from Johnson raises some serious questions, and that's exactly what we're going to be looking at today.
Ah,
Like what
right.
does it actually mean? So in this deep dive, we'll be focusing on that statement and looking at this report from The Guardian that goes into detail about Johnson suggesting that Congress could defund restructure
Wow.
or even eliminate federal courts as a response to rulings against Trump's policies.
That's wild.
Yeah, so we're going to try to unpack this and explore the constitutional implications of this kind of thinking.
Right.
What could this mean for the separation of powers? It's a big one.
It's huge.
Yeah.
So Johnson made these remarks to reporters, right? And he even pointed to his background as a constitutional lawyer
Right.
to kind of, emphasize
Yeah.
his understanding of congressional power.
Like he knows what he's talking about.
Exactly. But then later he clarified things a bit, saying that his comments were more about showing how broad Congress's authority is,
Right.
rather than being like an actual threat.
Right. It's like he was saying, look, we could do this, but we're not saying we will.
Right, exactly. But, you can't ignore the timing of this. It's coming at a time when Trump's allies are increasingly frustrated with the judiciary.
Yeah, for sure, especially with all the rulings against the previous administration.
Exactly.
Hmm.
So, when Johnson talks about this authority over the courts, Congress does have some power there, right?
Right.
Like they set the budget and the size of the courts.
Exactly. They control the purse strings and things like that. But those powers are meant to make sure the judiciary can function,
Right.
not to use as a weapon against them because you don't like their rulings.
Right. Johnson's statement seems to suggest a completely different
Oh, yeah,
and much bigger interpretation of this authority,
for sure. And this goes right to the heart of that fundamental constitutional principle.
the separation of powers.
Exactly. That whole idea that each branch has its own powers and limits.
Right.
Congress makes the laws, the president enforces them, the courts interpret them.
Right.
It prevents any one branch from having too much power.
And this idea of just eliminating a court totally undermines that.
Absolutely. It stops the judiciary from acting as an independent check on the other branches.
Right. So Johnson is claiming this authority, but doesn't the Constitution specifically prevent this kind of
It does.
legislative overreach?
Yes, the Constitution sets up 3 co-equal branches of government.
Right.
There's nothing in there that says Congress can just get rid of a court because they don't like a ruling.
Right. And historically, has anything like this ever happened before?
Well, there have been some debates about how much power Congress has over the courts.
Yeah.
They have used their power in the past to, change the number of judges or define jurisdictions,
Right.
which has kind of indirectly affected the judiciary.
Right.
Right. But this statement from Johnson takes it to a whole other level. It's
Yeah.
like he's suggesting a legislative veto over judicial decisions.
Wow. And the source we're looking at actually frames Johnson's comments as surrendering congressional authority to the executive branch.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because Congress has a lot of leverage,
Right.
with the budget and creating and funding agencies.
Right.
So to say that they should just eliminate courts as a response,
Right.
well, it implies they're willing to ignore these checks and balances that are already in place.
That's a really good point.
Right.
Now, the report mentions this specific case where the Supreme Court ruled against Trump.
Oh, right.
They rejected his attempt to freeze foreign aid,
Right.
which brings up a really important question. Does Johnson's logic apply to the Supreme Court too?
That's the question, isn't it? If they're willing to target lower courts for policy disagreements, could the Supreme Court be next?
It's a slippery slope.
And the source makes a pretty striking comparison. It's like saying you're going to get rid of the teacher or the referee, or in this case, the courts,
Wow.
because you don't like the outcome.
Because you didn't like the result.
Exactly. Instead of, actually addressing the underlying issues.
Yeah, like actually dealing with the problem.
It's a big difference, between actually addressing a ruling based on its merits and just trying to silence anyone who disagrees with you.
It is a big difference.
Cool.
And the source really drives that point home with its conclusion.
What's that?
It emphasizes how important justice and the rule of law are,
Absolutely.
and the danger of undermining the institutions that are supposed to uphold them.
Right. So we're seeing this tension, this suggestion that Congress has this huge power over the judiciary.
Yeah.
And they could use it in response to rulings that they don't like.
Right.
But at the same time, we have this constitutional framework that's supposed to guarantee judicial independence.
So where does that leave us? What are we supposed to think about all this?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? What happens if the legislative branch starts controlling the judicial branch just because they disagree on policy? What would that mean for the future of our legal system?
And for the idea of an independent judiciary.
Exactly. It's something we all need to think about.
It really is. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
It's been a fascinating conversation.
Absolutely.
And to all of you listening out there, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
See you later.